on the first. Welcome, everybody. Andrew, if you want to change slides. Oh, I know what happened. Welcome, everyone, to our Zoom presentation on ballot issues. I will take 1 second. I apologize. The League of Women Voters has been empowering voters with nonpartisan information to promote informed voting for more than a century. Thank you for turning to the League as you have your voice heard this election. I'm Maud Nerol, co-director for Action and Advocacy for the Colorado League of Women Voters of Colorado, providing you with basic information on what the statewide ballot issues will impact. We'll also have additional resources for those who would like more in-depth analysis. And after this first presentation is done, we'll have information on what the League recommends, what the League stances are on many of these measures. We also are delighted to have Andrea Wilkins, our legislative liaison for the State League, our invaluable legislative liaison for the State League. On our website, there's the address, lwvcolorado.org, ballot-issues, or just go to our main website, lwvcolorado.org, and click on elections and ballot issues. This handout and the Colorado election resources are on our main page, along with quite a bit of other information. So please go and rummage around and find their fact sheets and information on each of the ballot measures that we'll be talking about tonight. If you have your Blue Book, the Colorado Legislative Council publication, feel free to refer to it during this presentation. There are 14 statewide ballot issues, plus one measure put on out by the Regional Transportation District, which covers much of the Front Range. 7 were referred to the ballot by lawmakers. 7 were put on the ballot by citizen petition. By chance, 7 are constitutional amendments. 5 will change state statute, and there are 2 tax questions. And now I'm turning it over to Andrea Wilkins, our legislative liaison.
Thank you, Maud. All right, so we've got a list of everything that we are going to be covering tonight. Anyone that has received their Blue Book knows that it is a very heavy ballot initiative season that we're in the middle of. And hopefully to make things easy, we're going to try and discuss everything, all the issues in the order that they appear in the Blue Book. So as Maud mentioned, if you want to grab that, follow along. Hopefully this will be a handy way of working through the material. We're going to start talking about the 7 amendments to the Colorado Constitution that you see in that first column there. They'll be followed by a brief explanation of the 2 questions regarding taxation, and then we'll finish up with the 5 propositions, which are the changes to the Colorado statutes, or the proposed changes to the Colorado statutes. In addition, we will be discussing RTD 7A ballot issue, which will be discussed because although it is not a statewide ballot issue, it actually covers a really big chunk of the state. We believe that many people tuning in tonight are probably residing in one of the counties that is impacted and will be asked to vote on it. So we'll wrap things up with that for this portion of the presentation. And I do want to say, because there are so many issues and some of them are complex, we're going to be doing just a really high level overview because we are somewhat pressed for time tonight. But please know that you can always reach out to Maud or myself, any of the office staff, And we're happy to have follow-up conversations or answer any questions that you may have. Let's go ahead and move on to what we're actually going to be covering tonight. So in terms of each ballot initiative, we're going to be looking at what happens if it passes, what's it going to do, what happens if it fails, why is the issue on the ballot in the first place, kind of what is the goal or the intent behind it, what the fiscal impacts of the measure might be. And then we'll be making mention of some additional resources and points in the Blue Book that we believe it would really be helpful for you all to take a look at if you're really wanting to dive in deeper and get more information on some of these initiatives. Okay, so this sounds like really basic information, but a vote yes means, if you vote yes, it means you want the measure to pass. If you vote no, you want it to fail. And it sounds basic, but the language of these initiatives can be really confusing. So we just want to be clear about that up front, that yes, you want it to pass, no, you want it to fail. So as we move through, just sort of keeping that in mind, and with that, we will get into the amendments themselves. Okay, our first one up for discussion tonight is Amendment G, which is proposing a modification to the property tax exemption for veterans with disabilities. This measure was placed on the ballot by the legislature, and since it's proposing a constitutional change, it's proposing an addition of language to the state constitution. It does require a 55% vote to pass, so it is a bit of a higher threshold. And if it is approved, the ballot measure really would promote two key expansions. One, it would expand the number of veterans living with a disability who qualify for a property tax exemption for a portion of the value of their primary residence. And two, it would expand eligibility to include veterans with a significant service-connected disability that makes them unable to work. This is what the VA refers to as having an individual unemployability status. So if the measure is to fail, the existing requirements to receive the homestead exemption will remain in place, and it would continue to only be available to veterans whose disability is rated as 100% permanent and total. So the homestead exemption is currently in the state's constitution, and it's required that it go to voters to amend. This is not something that can be legislated. I think probably everyone here is somewhat familiar with the idea that constitutional changes in Colorado can only be approved or rejected by the voters. It's not something that the legislature can do. So this is why you're seeing this question presented to you. It's estimated that there are 3,700 veterans in Colorado who are not otherwise able to claim the homestead exemption that would be eligible for it in property tax year 2025. The homestead exemption reduces property taxes collected by counties and paid to local governments. The state then reimburses local governments for the revenue lost as a result of the exemption. So the fiscal impact would cause us to see an increase in state funding by about 1.8 million for state budget year 2025-26, and a similar amount in future years to reimburse local governments for lost property tax collections that would be prompted under the measure. The local government spending would be unchanged due to that state reimbursement. So some areas where you can get some additional information, of course, in addition to the resources provided through the League of Women Voters, would also like to refer you to the Blue Book, which is a publication of the Legislative Council Service of the Colorado General Assembly. The Blue Book is something that is sent to voters. I imagine many of you have already seen it. I know I received mine a few days ago, but you can also access it online. You can see the QR code here through the slides tonight, which makes it easy if you're looking for a digital copy of it. The purpose of the ballot information book, or the Blue Book, is to provide voters with the text, title, and a fair and impartial analysis of each initiated or referred constitutional amendment, law, or question that appears on the ballot. The analysis must include a summary of the measure, the major arguments both for and against it, and a brief fiscal assessment of the measure, so we understand, what the likely financial impact is going to be. The analysis may also include other information that would help voters understand the purpose and the effect of the measure. And in addition to that, if any of your local ballot measures require a tabor notice to be issued, that is information that you'll be getting separately from your county clerk and recorder. So the county clerks and recorders are responsible for publishing and mailing the required tabor notices on local tax changes that appear on the ballot. So that's something to be on the lookout for too, because that will help you understand, the full scope of things that are appearing on your ballot. Before too long here, you can always inquire with your county clerk and recorder for assistance or more information there. Okay, so specific to Amendment G, some of what you will find in terms of additional resources in the Blue Book. There's information on homestead exemption, information on who qualifies, how it would reduce a homeowner's property tax bill. Information that might be found in your local county treasurer office will provide details on the current homestead exemptions, what they are, and how you can apply. Okay, moving on to Amendment H, which is judicial discipline procedures and confidentiality. This initiative was placed on the ballot by the legislature in the form of a referred measure. It received a lot of broad support in terms of its votes. It only actually received one no vote as the referred measure came up for a vote before the General Assembly. Because it is contemplating a constitutional change, it does require that 55% threshold before it can pass. So if it passes, it would remove Colorado judges from having direct influence and oversight over the discipline of their colleagues through the creation of an independent adjudicative board made up of citizens, lawyers, and judges to conduct judicial misconduct hearings and impose disciplinary actions. It also would allow for more information to be shared with the public earlier on in the process. So potentially a little more transparency than what currently exists. On the flip side, if it were to fail, a select panel of judges will continue to conduct judicial misconduct hearings and would recommend disciplinary actions as a result of those hearings. The cases would remain confidential unless public sanctions are recommended, and they would be made public at the end of the process. So this initiative is appearing on the ballot, really kind of following an extensive batch of reporting by the Colorado Springs Gazette into a string of scandals that had occurred within the judicial branch. And as a result of that reporting, there were revelations that led the Colorado legislature to push for a new way to handle judges that are accused of wrongdoing that would be independent of the state Supreme Court. In their efforts to address this issue within the General Assembly, there were 3 bipartisan bills that were passed to change the judicial discipline process and workplace culture, including this amendment here that you see in the form of Amendment H. The fiscal impact here would be the measure will increase state costs by about $50,000 per year. The funding utilized would provide compensation and training for members of this newly created Judicial Discipline Board and Rulemaking Committee. Okay, so in terms of additional resources, you can refer to the Blue Book for more in-depth information on really what judicial misconduct is, what is meant by that, how is discipline defined, and how are these issues currently handled. There's also additional information on the changes that will be made to the judicial discipline process, more in depth than what we can go in tonight. And it is important to note that this particular amendment was recommended by the judicial branch. You'll also find information on the merit selection and evaluation process concerning judges. You can see the link on this slide here. I believe everyone will be getting copies of the slides if you have not already, so you'll be able to easily refer to that information for further education. All right, and then on the topic of judges, we do want to note that there's going to be many questions, as there always are, about judicial retention on the ballot. You're going to be asked to vote on the judges for your county and all the appellate courts. Not everyone is very familiar. Probably most people are not very familiar with the merit selection system or how Colorado elects their judges. So it can be really helpful to take time to learn more about how all of this works at the link you see here on your screen, judicialperformance.colorado.gov. In the meantime, we do encourage you to refer to the Blue Book to review the judicial performance evaluations that can help you determine your vote on whether you would want to retain a judge or not. Again, not many people are super familiar with this process. A lot of people tend to skip the questions regarding judges, but we do really encourage that you take advantage of the educational information that's available to you so you can make an informed vote on this and really weigh in on those judicial retention questions as well. All right, turning to Amendment I, the constitutional bail exception for first-degree murder. This initiative was placed on the ballot by the legislature. It is another one that was approved by a wide margin. Only 4 Democrats and 1 Republican voted against it. And again, it does need to pass with a 55% threshold in order to be approved. If it is approved by the voters, it would allow judges to deny bail to a person who's charged with first-degree murder when certain criteria are met. If it were to fail to pass, it would require judges to set bail for all persons who are charged with first-degree murder. So the rationale for this being on the ballot is it's intended to fix what is thought to be an unintended consequence of Colorado's abolishment of the death penalty, where there's no longer an exception to the bail requirement for first-degree murder. And differing interpretations have emerged on whether or not a judge is required to set bail in these cases. So the legislature referred this amendment to amend the Colorado Constitution to, again, allow judges to deny bail in first-degree murder cases when there's strong evidence that the person committed the crime. There's not a lot of fiscal impact to speak of on this particular initiative. While determining whether the criteria for denying bail has been met may increase the workload that would be required under this measure, it's thought to be pretty minimal, and the impact on state and local spending is not significant enough for there really to be a fiscal impact here. And then for additional resources, we would encourage you to refer to the Blue Book for more definition around the legal definition of first-degree murder and how the criteria that need to be met under this initiative would be defined and handled if this measure were approved. And you can find that information on page 20 of the Blue Book. Okay, turning to Amendment J, repealing the definition of marriage in the Constitution. This initiative was placed on the ballot by the legislature, again, in the form of a referred measure. The vote on this one was a little more partisan. It was by I'm sorry, I'm kind of looking at my notes incorrectly here. It was approved with one Democratic no vote and 8 Republican yes votes. The simple majority of voters are required to repeal this language in the Constitution. And the reason we're looking at that 50% threshold here instead of the 55% is that it's taking language out instead of adding something in. So the threshold for passage there is a little bit lower. So here we are looking at just a simple majority. So if the measure were to pass, it's important to kind of think about the historical context here. I think everyone probably recalls that 9 years ago, the US Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage across all of the US. So by passing this amendment, the state constitution's obsolete language that we currently have in there now will be eliminated and will then be in alignment with court rulings and the current federal law. On the other hand, if it were to fail, the current language in the Colorado Constitution that defines a valid marriage as a union between one man and one woman will remain, though it is, superseded by federal law. But why is it on the ballot? Why are we concerned about this if it's, essentially invalid language? Well, the amendment is intended to address the future possibility of the US Supreme Court overturning its previous the legality of same-sex marriage to each of the states to decide. So by leaving the current definition of marriage in Colorado's Constitution, it's possible that we might be jeopardizing the ability of same-sex Coloradans to marry. So it really is kind of a proactive attempt to ensure rights are protected by getting that obsolete language off the ballot. Not a lot of fiscal impact here either. We're really just looking at a change to ensure conformity with the Colorado Constitution to that of the current practice and rulings by the Colorado Supreme Court and those of the US Supreme Court. This one's really pretty straightforward. We don't actually have any additional resources to refer to on this one. So I think this one is maybe one of the more cut and dried ones that we have in our batch for discussion tonight. Okay, so Amendment K is dealing with the modification of constitutional election deadlines. It was placed on the ballot by the legislature, and this one does require that heightened threshold, 55% of the vote to pass. And if it is to pass, it would make the deadlines 1 week earlier for citizens to submit signatures for initiative and referendum petitions. The change would be to 3 months before the election. It would move up the date when judges and justices must file their declaration of intent by 1 week to run for retention, again, to at least 3 months before the election. And it would move up the date when ballot issue official text and titles are published by the legislative research staff by 1 month, from at least 15 days before the election to 30 days prior. If it were to fail, we would maintain our current constitutional deadlines for election filings and publication of ballot issues in newspapers. So the rationale here is that as we've discussed, all amendments to the state constitution have to go to a vote of the people. That's not something that the legislature has the power to handle. So essentially, this is attempting to provide more room to finalize the content of ballots before they're printed and sent to the voters. It's an attempt to give voters more time to research and review the ballot issues, which in a year like we have now, where we've got 14 often very complex measures on the ballot, that additional time can really be helpful in allowing people the time they need to study and really dig in on the details. It is also believed that with shorter time to collect signatures and file petitions, it could make it more difficult for citizens seeking change to state laws. So how you feel about that probably depends on, kind of your philosophy as, how you want to see policy made in Colorado, how you feel about the legislative process versus the citizen initiative process. Not a lot of fiscal impact here as well. Local government might shift or reduce workload for county clerks and recorders, but there really isn't any statewide fiscal impact to speak of here. And again, we don't really have any additional resources for you to refer to here. You can always refer to the Blue Book for more extensive information, but nothing specific here that we really want to draw your attention to. All right, Amendment 79, the constitutional right to abortion. This was placed on the ballot by Citizen Initiative, which I am sure leaguers are well aware of since we were a force in helping make that happen. Again, it does require 55% of the vote to pass. And if it is to pass, it will place the right to abortion in the Colorado Constitution, and it would prohibit state and local governments from denying, impeding, or discriminating against anyone exercising that right. It would repeal the current ban on state and local funding for abortion services. Conversely, if it were to fail, the current statutory right to abortion in Colorado will remain in effect. And it would maintain the authority of the state legislature to determine the legality oops, getting ahead of myself, sorry about that. Of abortion. And really what we mean there is that, with statutory changes, the legislature has the authority a future legislature has the authority to come in and, repeal or amend, make changes. So that authority, of course, would continue to lie with the General Assembly. If it failed, it would also continue the ban on public funding. There would be no government-provided state and local money that could be used to pay for abortions. Okay, so again, some of the background. Why are we seeing this on the ballot? So there's a desire by backers of this initiative to essentially take the current policy a step further and enshrine the right to abortion in the state constitution. Future decisions on funding abortion services will be made by the Colorado legislature and local government. So the funding side of things is a little, to be determined, so to speak. But really kind of the intent here is to make the right to abortion in Colorado and the full scope of reproductive health more durable than what we see in, when the right is a statutory right. So in terms of funding, the measure does not guarantee government-provided abortion funding and potentially would allow state and local money to be used to pay for abortions through Medicaid or state or local government employee health insurance plans. In current law, there are exceptions in federal and state law that allow Medicaid to pay for an abortion when the life of the mother is in danger or when the pregnancy is a result of rape or incest. In terms of fiscal impacts, there's no change in spending that has been estimated. It's really going to depend on the future decisions of the state legislature and local government. So again, that's a little bit of a to be determined. Additional resources here, you can refer to the Blue Book for really kind of the overarching context and legal history of abortion, both in Colorado and in the United States more broadly. Okay, moving along to Amendment 80, the constitutional right to school choice. This measure was placed on the ballot through Citizen Initiative, and it requires a 55% threshold to pass. If it is approved, it would create a constitutional right to school choice and equal opportunity for K through 12 children. It would establish a new constitutional definition of school choice to include neighborhood and charter schools, private schools, homeschools, open enrollment options, and future innovations in education. That's language taken directly from the measure itself. The measure would result in no immediate change to state law or the enrollment policies of local school districts. If it fails, we would maintain the current system of school choice in state, which isn't in the Constitution, but obviously is a very well-established practice in Colorado. And it allows parents to choose from many public school options, including, private school or homeschool settings. The rationale here is that backers of this initiative are looking to enshrine in the Constitution the rights of parents to choose the type of education from kindergarten to 12th grade. And there's also the goal of limiting the authority of the legislature or state and local school boards to make changes. By making it a constitutional change, obviously that power again, it just lies with people. Fiscal impact, oh, I keep getting ahead of myself. Sorry, I'm not moving my cursor very well. Sorry about that. Okay. Education related spending by the state or school district.
Andrea, you're freezing. You might want to so depending on how the measure is interpreted by the courts and the state legislature, the measure may change the allocation of state or local funding for education, and there are no additional resources for this amendment. Andrea, are you back?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay, are you able to hear me?
I could hear you.
Okay, good. Hopefully I'm coming in okay. I'm going to go ahead and leave my video off, and I hope that will solve the problem. Okay, moving on to Proposition JJ, additional sports betting tax revenue. This was placed on the ballot by the legislature, and the referred measure cleared the legislature with very broad support. Only 2 Democrats and 1 Republican voted against it. This initiative will require just a simple majority to pass. We've completed our discussion of the amendments. We're on to the propositions, which are proposed statutory changes. So if this one is to pass, it will allow the state to keep sports betting tax revenue above the amount that was previously approved by voters, and to use the money for water projects instead of refunding to casinos and sports betting operators. The additional money will be used for water conservation and protection projects. However, if it fails, the state will pay refunds to casinos and sport betting operators when the sports betting tax revenue is greater than the amount that was previously approved by voters. So when voters approved the sports betting 5 years ago, state economist estimates were low, and it's now believed that in the coming years, the current tax rate will bring in significantly more revenue than was originally estimated. So under Tabor, the state has to get voter permission to hold on to additional money. I think people will recall, we've seen similar questions like this on our ballots in recent years around, the retention of excess money in relation to tobacco and marijuana taxes. This is kind of a similar thing that we're seeing here. So for the fiscal impact, retaining the revenue is expected to eliminate the refunds to casinos and the sports betting operators at a level of approximately $3.7 million over the next 3 fiscal tax years. The retained tax revenue would be transferred to the Colorado Water Plan Implementation Cash Fund, and the money will be spent on water projects as allocated and determined by the state legislature and the Colorado Water Conservation Board. So here you can refer to your blue book to get more information on how sports betting is currently taxed and how the tax revenue will be used to pay for those water projects that are contemplated. You can also find information on Tabor and the requirements there on the league website. And you can get information on the state-funded water projects through the link that you see on the screen. So some important reference links available on this slide. Okay, Proposition KK, firearms and ammunition excise tax. This is another measure that was placed on the ballot by the legislature. And again, this was one that was a little more divided in its support. The measure passed with only Democratic support. All of the legislature's Republicans and 2 Democrats voted against it. And in order to pass, it does require a majority approval by the voters. So if it's approved, it will create a new tax on firearms, firearm parts, and ammunition of 6.5%. And it would use the revenue for crime victim services, mental health services for veterans and youth, and school safety programs. The firearm dealers, manufacturers, and ammunition sellers are responsible for paying the new tax on their retail sales. Although there are some exemptions built in. There are some sellers that would be exempt from the new tax. These include sellers that have an annual sales revenue of less than 20,000, retail sales to law enforcement agencies, and active duty military members, along with private sales between individuals who are not firearms dealers, manufacturers, or ammunition vendors. Conversely, if it fails, the state's taxation of firearms and ammunition will not change. It'll just remain as it currently is. And there's currently a federal excise tax on retail sales of firearms and ammunition by firearm and ammunition manufacturers and importers. In Colorado, retail sales are subject to state and local sales tax that apply to most goods. No excise tax is currently levied by either the state or local governments. So the Colorado Constitution requires voters to approve new taxes. We know this as a requirement of Tabor. The current sources of funding for the programs that are referenced in this measure are declining or will be unavailable in the future. The reasoning for the lack of funding is that the program funding that has existed up to this point, which has been a combination of federal and state funds, has just been kind of drying up and declining in recent years, and more specifically, the COVID-19 relief funds are no longer available. So we do have some really critical programs that are really lacking revenue to see those kind of carry on. So this would potentially be a source of support. The fiscal impact would initially be paid by the gun dealers, manufacturers, and ammunition vendors, although it is likely that they would add the cost onto their products. So it is something that potentially would ultimately be borne by the consumer as well. Some additional resources via the Blue Book. You can get information on what firearm products are subject to this new tax, what's actually going to be falling under this initiative, and information on the distribution of firearms and ammunition tax revenue. You can also get information on the full fiscal impact on state and local governments through legal resources around Tabor that you can find through the link on this slide. Okay, looking now at Proposition 127, which deals with the prohibition on bobcat, lynx, and mountain lion hunting. This was placed on the ballot by Citizen Initiative and requires a majority vote to pass. If approved, it would end the hunting season for mountain lions and bobcats in Colorado, and it would bar the state from ever allowing lynx hunting. It would prohibit intentionally killing, wounding, pursuing, entrapping, or discharging a deadly weapon at bobcats, lynx, and mountain lions anywhere in Colorado, and it would establish penalties for violations. It does allow for certain scenarios that are considered lawful killings. Basically, big cats could still be killed by state or federal employees as part of a population management effort, or with previous state approval, possibly by ranchers to prevent livestock depredation. And then people who accidentally hit an animal and kill an animal with their car would not be penalized. It would remove mountain lions from the definition of big game, making landowners ineligible for state reimbursement of any damage that's caused by a mountain lion. It's important to note that current law does not provide for reimbursement for bobcat or lynx damage. On the other side, if it fails, the state would continue to allow the hunting of bobcats and mountain lions as currently regulated. Hunting lynx, however, would remain illegal under the state and federal law. Lynx were reintroduced in Colorado in 1999 and are still considered endangered by the state. So this citizen initiative, proponents claim that populations can naturally regulate themselves, and there's a desire to restrict the ability of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission to issue licensing that is used to achieve the state's ecological objectives. The measure does use the term trophy hunting, but it is important to note that it bans all hunting, pursuing or entrapping of bobcat, lynx, and mountain lions, regardless of what the intent is. In terms of fiscal impact, it would decrease state revenue to CPW as a result of the elimination or reduction of hunting license sales. But it would also decrease state expenditures in CPW as a result of decreases in game damage claims. And it is possible that there would be increased revenue from fines or civil penalties that might occur, in relation to violations under the initiative. And then if you're interested in more information, you can get a much more detailed overview of how hunting is regulated in Colorado on page 40 of the Blue Book. Okay, turning now to Proposition 128, parole eligibility for crimes of violence. This was placed on the ballot by Citizen Initiative and requires a majority vote to pass. If approved, it would increase the amount of prison time a person convicted of certain violent crimes must serve to 85% before becoming eligible for discretionary parole or earned deductions. It would make a person convicted of a third crime of violence ineligible for discretionary parole or earned time reductions. And the crimes that are implicated here would include murder, sexual assault, aggravated robbery, and serious cases of assault, kidnapping, arson, and burglary. It would impact parole eligibility of a person who's incarcerated for crimes that are committed on or after January 1st, 2025. So that's essentially when it would go into effect. On the flip side of things, if it is to fail, a person convicted of certain crimes of violence is required to serve 75% of their sentence in prison before being eligible for discretionary parole, minus any earned time for progressing in personal, professional, or educational programs. So some of the incentive here, proponents of the initiative believe it will help reduce crime and ensure that justice is served. It's estimated that around 220 individuals per year are sentenced to prison for crimes of violence and currently serve an average of about 23 years in prison, although that is likely to increase under this measure. On the other side of things, opponents claim that there's no evidence that this measure will actually result in reduced crime. Fiscal impacts would include increases in state spending, basically in two key ways. In the short term, it would require a one-time computer system update to the Department of Corrections case management system. And this cost is pretty modest, estimated around $12,000. But then beginning in approximately 20 years, as we're taking kind of the longer view of things, the state spending will increase due to the measures increase in the percentage of prison sentences that must be served. So the actual cost will likely increase with inflation, and it can depend on offender behavior and decisions by the state parole board. So we know that we're looking at increased costs as we do take that long view, but what exactly that looks like is another scenario where it's pretty to be determined. Some additional resources. Blue Book will provide more information on what parole is and how does discretionary parole differ from mandatory. It also will provide information on crimes of violence sentencing and some comparison charts, so you can kind of take a look at how different crimes are handled. All right, turning to Proposition 129, which establishes a veterinary professional associate's position. This was placed on the ballot by Citizens Initiative, and it would create a new mid-level regulated profession of veterinary associate. They're kind of classifying that as somewhere between a vet technician, who has a 2 years associate degree and a veterinarian who has 8 or more years of education. And this new position would be referred to as the Veterinary Professional Associate, or VPA. The VPA would be individuals who have obtained a master's degree in veterinary care, and they would be able to diagnose animals, perform routine surgeries, and order and perform tests and procedures under the supervision of a licensed veterinarian. If it is to fail, only veterinarians, veterinary technicians, and veterinary technician specialists would be regulated providers of veterinary care in Colorado. So the incentive behind this one is that backers of the initiative include animal welfare groups that are concerned about a shortage of affordable veterinary care. But it is also opposed by veterinary professionals who warn that the training requirements are just not sufficient for the level of care that the VPAs will be allowed to offer. So there's some safety concerns being offered up by opponents of the measure. In terms of the fiscal impact, it's anticipated that the state board workload will increase to adopt rules, but spending itself is expected to be pretty minimal. So it's really more of a workload issue than a big difference in expenditures. However, once a population of VPAs exists, the state spending will need to increase for oversight and enforcement, but state revenue will increase in equal amounts from registration fees that would be charged to those associates. And again, some additional resources here from the Blue Book. You can find more in-depth information on veterinary professions and the current law versus what's being proposed as new law under this initiative. All right, moving on to Proposition 130, funding of law enforcement. This is another citizen initiative, and if it passes, it would direct the state government to create a new fund of $350 million to the Colorado Department of Public Safety to distribute to local law enforcement agencies. It would pay a new $1 million death benefit to the survivors of law enforcement officers who are killed in the line of duty. And it would provide grants to local police and sheriff's departments to boost hiring and retention. If it were to fail, the current levels of funding for local law enforcement agencies will remain unchanged, and families of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty will continue at their existing benefit levels provided by current law. The initiative is intended to direct how the state legislature allocates Colorado's existing budget without any specific considerations of local public safety needs or consideration of the larger context of the state's broader fiscal obligations. The current death benefits vary and are dependent on the officer's agency. The initiative would guarantee compensation for all law enforcement officers that are killed while on duty, in addition to any death and disability benefits that are provided through the officer's pension. So there is a pretty significant fiscal impact here. We're looking at a fiscal impact in the neighborhood of $350 million. It is not required that the state set that aside in a single year, but it is required that the money come from Colorado's existing budget, not from new taxes. The spending allocations to local agencies or the grants that are provided for under this program would be determined by the state legislature and CDPS. The state's obligation to provide death benefits will continue indefinitely, and eventually, to keep that up, it will require additional state expenditures in future fiscal years. And again, here we don't have any specific resources to draw your attention to, other than to generally look to the Blue Book for more in-depth information, as well as link resources and information on the initiatives more broadly. Okay, and turning now to Proposition 131, establishing an all-candidate primary and ranked choice voting general election. This is a citizen initiative. I think probably most people are aware that representatives from LWVCO have been participating in the stakeholder discussions for many months now. Basically, if this initiative were to pass, it would change the way Colorado votes really in two significant ways. It would create an all-candidate vote for one primary election that would be open to all voters by abolishing the current party primary and assembly system of candidate selection for federal and state offices, with the exception of U.S. president, district attorneys, or local government offices. And then as all qualified candidates would be placed on the primary ballot, the final four candidates who receive the most primary votes would advance to the general election, regardless of party affiliation. So because this one is a little more complex and alternative voting methods such as ranked choice voting may not be familiar to everyone, we did want to provide an example, the sample ballot that I believe is taken straight from the Blue Book. So you can kind of refer back to this and get some more in-depth information. But for purposes of our overview tonight, we do want to provide this sample so you can kind of see how ranked choice voting would be used for the general election. And you can see that voters would rank as many or a few of the four candidates as they wish in their order of preference. So you can see here that, we've got, a first, second, and third choice candidate. And then the sample voter did not elect to assign a position for, or to make a vote for a fourth choice candidate. It is important to note that the actual ballot will look different depending on what future ballot design rules dictate and any decisions by election officials, but this kind of gives you an idea of what this could look like. This version of ranked choice voting is also known as instant runoff voting because it's eliminating the need for another election or runoff to determine the winner, which can save voting time and reduce election costs. And then you can kind of see the progression here from one round to the next. So if there are two or fewer active candidates, the ranked voting tally is complete. But you kind of can move on to see from round one to round two to round three. We're starting out with four candidates. The candidate with the fewest number of votes becomes eliminated, and then the votes get distributed according to voter preference to the appropriate candidate in round two, and so on until you ultimately have a winner coming out of round three, which in this scenario is candidate B with 56% of the vote. So the candidate with the highest number of votes would be elected, as you can see happening here in this example. And then all voter rankings would be combined in a mathematical process to determine the winner. It is really important to note here that Proposition 131 cannot take effect until certain things happen. There has to be at least 12 municipalities that meet various demographic qualifications and use ranked choice voting. And the state must also audit these elections and prepare a report before an election for state and federal office using the changes proposed here can occur. So we do have some things that need to happen out in the communities before we see this implemented if this measure were to pass. So very important to keep that in mind. Okay, so now turning to, what happens if it fails? Well, not surprisingly, things stay the same. The existing primary election system and the current method of selecting candidates and counting votes at the general election wouldn't change. The incentive here, the reason that we're seeing this on the ballot, is a desire to conduct nonpartisan elections to create a more representative and functional government throughout the state. Proponents are of the belief that it would provide all candidates, regardless of political party affiliation, an equal opportunity to make the general election ballot. On the flip side, opposition not opposition parties, but opponents to the measure claim that it would give an unfair advantage to wealthier independent candidates and may cause confusion or mistrust of the election outcome for voters. The fiscal impact does involve an increase in state spending related to the cost of hiring staff, software updates, ballot redesign, voter outreach, and reimbursement to counties for election costs. Local governments will increase costs to conduct the primary and general elections due to the updates to ballots, voting systems, and the training of both voters and staff. And then the state would reimburse a portion of the county election costs. So probably a pretty important source of additional information here. You can refer to the Blue Book for information on what ranked choice voting is, how it works, what the ballots might look like, how they would be counted, really kind of just an overview of the whole process that gets into more detail than we have time for tonight. But I would also strongly encourage you to look at the information that's available on our alternative voting methods task force webpage. We've got a lot of league resources on this topic, so it's definitely an issue that may not be something that everyone is familiar with in an in-depth way, but certainly we've got some great resources that can assist voters in making an informed vote here. And then finally, the RTD measure that I had mentioned, ballot measure 7A, again, not a statewide ballot issue, but it does involve a good chunk of the state. So for people that are residing in any of the impacted counties, you are going to be asked to vote on this measure. And those counties include all of Boulder, Broomfield, Denver, and Jefferson counties, and then parts of Adams, Arapahoe, and Douglas. So a lot of people involved in that. This initiative was placed on the ballot by the RTD board, and it will require a majority to pass. If it does pass, it would extend the current voter authorization for RTD to retain and spend all revenue without further voter approval. It does not raise the tax rate or impose a new tax. If it fails, RTD will need to cut its sales tax rate or rebate the revenue that it receives in the future to citizens as the previously voter authorized bonds issued to finance the construction of light rail lines that were approved way back in 1999 are scheduled to be paid off in November of this year. So voter approval is required for retention of those ongoing retention of the revenue. It's on the ballot essentially because of the requirements of Tabor. RTD is required to get voter approval to hold on to that additional money beyond what was approved initially in 1999. And fiscal impact is one that is to be seen. We will get more information on that when the Tabor notices are mailed to you. So that is an important piece of information that you should be on the lookout for. Unfortunately, we do not have information that we can share with you tonight, but more detail there will be forthcoming, so you'll have time to analyze that before it's time to cast your ballot. And with that concludes our overview of all of the statewide ballot issues plus the RTD measure. Please keep in mind that if you want information on where the league stands, you can go to this link. It will take you there. But much more fun than that, I'm going to turn it over to Maud, who is going to walk you through our rationale for the stances that we took on most of the ballot initiatives, those for which we had a position. So take it away, Maud.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrea, for going through and providing so much information. For those people who don't want to know where the league stands on most of these measures and why we took those stances, either cover your ears or it's a good time to roll off. For the rest of you, I will share screen.
Oh, Maud, are you sharing or you want me to?
I'll share.
Okay, okay,
You get to watch the chat with Jane and answer questions.
okay, got it.
So we switch colors, blue for the neutral information. What if it passes? What if it doesn't? Red for where the league stands. This is our League of Women Voters of Colorado, Where the League Stands quick reference guide. And the league provides nonpartisan information on the statewide ballot measures to promote informed voter participation. We'll go through our stances, yes or no, and why we took our stances. This guide is on the State League website. You'll see in the lower right-hand corner where the league stands URL, and lower right-hand corner of all the slides tonight. How does the league take a stance? Well, league members study issues in depth. I know some of you in this webinar have done league studies, decide on positions by consensus. For example, the league supports the right of privacy of the individual to make reproductive choices. Our positions are long-standing, and the position books, the state and national position books, are available on the State League website.
Maud?
Yes.
The whole slide is not showing on the screen, so I don't know if you expanded your view.
Oh.
Much better, thank you.
Oh. Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much, Jane. So how do we take a stance? We apply our positions. There are dozens of specialists in the State League's Legislative Action Committee who analyze and testify on bills during the legislative session and research and analyze ballot issues in the summer. Who said we had an off season? We use our positions to judge bills and ballot issues and make recommendations on a stance. So this is going to go not through in ballot measure order, but more in complexity order. So we're going to, where Andrea ended on 131, we're going to start on 131. And the league supports Proposition 131, the all candidate primary ranked choice voting general elections, because with so many districts safe seats for one party or another, the low turnout primary is currently the decisive election for many races. It's basically decided in the primary, and the general just confirms the outcome of the primary. Proposition 31 would make most general elections competitive and more engaging. The league supports electoral methods that encourage voter participation and voter engagement, that encourages those with minority opinions to participate and promote access to voting. The league also supports authorizing and implementing alternatives to the current plurality voting method that allow people to express their preferences more effectively. Funding for law enforcement. The league opposes the $350 million appropriation from the general fund because the league supports adequate funding of state government programs in public schools. There are no spare dollars in the general fund to support this measure. This measure would require cutting other state programs, likely including education, making it less likely that Colorado's government and public schools would be adequately funded. Amendment 80, constitutional right to school choice. Again, League of Women Voters of Colorado opposes this, recommends a no vote. This measure could require the legislature to allocate public funds for private schools and homeschooling to support choice among educational options. siphoning funds from public schools. The League views public schools as a public good, a vital component of a functioning democracy. In addition, the League supports a state finance system that provides enough funds for public schools to equalize educational opportunity and relieve the property tax. On 7A, the Regional Transportation District, RTD serves all or part of 8 counties: Boulder, Broomfield, Denver, Jefferson, Western Adams, Western Arapahoe, Northern Douglas, and part of Weld County. 7A will neither let RTD raise tax rates nor impose a new tax, but it will be able to continue to spend money from current tax rates and other revenue, such as federal grants, into the future. The League supports RTD Measure 7A because we support a balanced transportation system that includes a variety of modes in appropriate mix for each area that helps improve mobility and quality of life for all residents. And we support measures to reduce vehicular pollution, including more energy efficient transportation systems and adequate revenue, again, to fund government programs. Amendment 79, the constitutional right to abortion. The League strongly supports this. We support policy that protects the constitutional right of privacy of the individual to make reproductive choices, regardless of insurance coverage or lack of coverage. We support this so strongly that the state League members all across our 19 or so groups, local leagues, collected signatures to help get this on the ballot. And some people in this webinar were among those collecting signatures, so thank you much. Amendment G, modified a property tax exemption for veterans with a disability. Again, here we are in the ones that are more straightforward. It expands eligibility for the homestead exemption for veterans with a disability to include veterans who are unable to gain or maintain substantially gainful employment as a result of their service-connected disabilities, what the Veterans Administration, the VA, refers to as the individual unemployability status. And there's detail on that in the Blue Book, how that's defined and how the VA determines that. The League supports income assistance programs based on need that provide decent, adequate standards for food, clothing, and shelter. The League recommends a yes vote on judicial disciplinary procedures and confidentialities. We recommend the supports of this. We believe governmental bodies must protect the citizens' right to know by making public records accessible, and that transparency is a key tenet of the League. This would improve transparency of judicial discipline procedures. Amendment J, repealing the definition of marriage in the state constitution. The League recommends a yes vote. We support this measure. We believe in the individual liberties guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States, and that individual rights now protected by the Constitution should not be weakened or abridged. And repealing the outdated definition of marriage in our state constitution would help retain that in case the two state and US Supreme Courts overrule their current decisions. Amendment K, modifying the constitutional election deadlines. The State League supports this. We recommend a yes vote. Changing the election deadlines in the state constitution to allow election officials more time before finalizing ballots. The League believes the state constitution and any proposed constitutional amendments should provide a flexible framework for effective state and local government, giving our election officials a little more time would help make things more effective, ballot handling more effective. Proposition JJ, retain additional sports betting tax revenue. Again, the State League recommends yes vote supporting this measure to allow the state to keep and spend all the revenue from the existing sports betting tax. So remember, when voters approved that sports betting tax, they approved two different things. One was a tax rate and one was a revenue amount. The tax rate won't stay. The tax rate will stay the same. It's just removing that revenue cap. So revenue in excess of the 29 million approved by the voters in 2019 would be allowed, the state would allow to keep that revenue and increase the funding for water conservation and protection projects. The league supports measures that promote the wise and balanced use of water in Colorado. There are 4 measures for which the league has no position, and therefore we have no stance, no recommendation. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm one ahead of myself. I apologize. Proposition KK, firearms and ammunition excise tax. The league supports this 6.5% excise tax on the retail sales of firearms, firearm parts, or ammunition to fund mental health services, including for military vets and at-risk youth, school safety and gun violence prevention, and support services for victims of domestic violence and other violent crimes. The league supports access to behavioral health services, including diagnosis, treatment, and medications for all age groups. The league supports preventing violence with the active role of government and allocation of public money, and early intervention for children at risk. Now, the league has no positions on 4 of these measures. We don't have any positions on animals or their health care. So we don't have positions for or against Proposition 127 or 129. And we don't have positions on bail or parole. So the League of Women Voters of Colorado Quick Reference Guide is available on the State League website. And there's much more information on the measures, on our stances, why we took those stances, why we make those recommendations at lwvcolorado.org, WTLS, where the league stands. Thank you much for learning where the league stands. I think we are done for tonight. Do we have any outstanding questions in the Q&A?
There just was one other question that I saw here. Hold on, I have too many things open at one time. Bear with me one second. Okay, so regarding 131, what is the impact on political parties? Does 131 lead to stronger parties when one party is dominant? And when a party is a minority, and there are, say, 3 to 4 candidates from the dominant party, does 131 make it harder for the minority party candidate with one to build strength? It was a lot.
That was a lot. So voters will get a choice in the general election of 4 different candidates. They can rank those candidates. Very likely, there will be, even in a heavily majority district, very likely one of those 4 candidates will be from the minority party. And so voters in November will have more choice. And parties, of course, can throw their weight behind whatever candidates they decide on. Andrea, do you have more comments on 131?
I don't have any great in-depth comments to offer up, but I would say just in general, I think in its best form, there's hope that it kind of takes some of the partisanship out of elections and maybe takes us away from some of the super negative campaigning that we see happening, because the thinking is that people can look more at the candidates and the issues that they stand for, as opposed to really being guided by the party. And then I don't know if Tony or Celeste are on the call tonight, and I know they can speak to this much better than I can, but there's also some research that I think has demonstrated that in terms of negative campaigning, a ranked voting method tends to reduce that to some extent, because people have a tendency not to completely burn bridges, because even if you aren't somebody's first place choice, there's still potential for you to win, even if you're someone's second choice. So I think there is some incentive to really engage on the issues. I would venture to say that I think the major political parties are a little hesitant to embrace it, because it does shake up the status quo, and that's not always something that change maybe is not always a welcome thing across the board. But yes, there is a lot of information out there on how some of this plays out, and how this can do good things.
Oh, Andrea, you just froze, but there is a lot of information. The State League has an alternative voting methods task force, and they have quite a rich web page. If you go to the State League website under task forces and click on the alternative voting methods task force, their page has a wealth of information on different kinds of ranked choice voting, including this particular method, instant runoff voting, and lots of links to other resources. So with that, I think we thank you very much. Any other questions that we need to?
That's
Jane,
all that's here. That's all that's here.
Okay.
Just a reminder, if anybody has questions afterwards, feel free to email me at info@lwvcolorado.org. And that's info@lwvcolorado.org, and I'll make sure the right people get that question to get answered.
Super. And thank you everyone for taking time from your evening to learn about ballot measures in Colorado. And